Good morning, everybody. Welcome to the AWS Worldwide Public Sector DC Summit. We are thrilled to have you here this morning. If you have not already, please be sure to download our app. There's a web app on the Android. If you have any troubles downloading that, feel free to see us in the back of the room. And then there's also an iPhone app available as well. We are collecting feedback via those apps on all of these sessions, and also the entire schedule is available for you through the sessions. Just a few housekeeping items before we get started. Emergency exits to the right and the back of the room. Please do not get in the elevators if there is an emergency. There's also bathrooms out the door to the left. We are recording all sessions today at the summit. Please silence your cell phones and be aware that you are being recorded. We believe there should be time at the end of this session to ask questions. There's a microphone in the middle of the room should you have a question, and there is a time we would love to hear from you. And then, without further ado, I am thrilled to introduce Jamie Shover, who is our Director of Data and Analytics, and Nicole Weaver, who is the CIO of the Kennedy Center. I personally had the great pleasure of working with them, and we helped them take their existing data warehouse and implement an AWS Enterprise Data Lake, which one key accomplishment from that was taking a data warehouse that took 26 hours to refresh the data and reduce that time to 6 minutes, which has been a pretty significant accomplishment for that organization. So I'm thrilled to hear them speak more about how that's benefited them and their clientele. So please, a big round of applause for Nicole Weaver. Thank you so much.
Good morning. Thank you, the front row. Thank you, Kitty, for that introduction. My job at the Kennedy Center is actually a little interesting. I'm the Chief Strategy Officer and the CIO, which is an odd combination, but it's actually very front and center for this particular project, which combines all of the data that we have and need in order to meet our strategic goals and deals with the technical parts of that as well. So what we're going to be talking about today is this project that we did in a very short time frame. We're going to talk about, first of all, why we thought we needed to do it, and the process by which we came to land on AWS tools, which was not a straight line. And then we're going to talk a little bit about what we ended up implementing. That's not me, that's people smarter than me, and what we learned along the way. So a little bit about the Kennedy Center. The Kennedy Center was created by an act of Congress, and it was signed into law in 1958 by President Eisenhower. It was conceived to be the National Cultural Center with a mandate to present a wide variety of performing arts and also to advance arts education across the country. So right out of the gate, we had a mandate that was national, not regional. In 1963, when President Kennedy was assassinated, the Congress designated the Cultural Center to be the memorial to John F. Kennedy. And at that time, they allowed for a funding stream to build and then to maintain the building as a memorial. But still today, we have the obligation of raising private funding for all of the activity related to the performing arts that happens at the Kennedy Center. And that's actually a pretty important part of the problem set that we have. So it's a pretty busy place. Every year we present over 2,000 performances. Many of them are free. We welcome approximately estimated over 2 million visitors. Some of them are ticketed and we know who they are, and a lot of them are not ticketed, so we have no idea who they are. The Kennedy Center is a public building that's open from 10 a.m. to midnight every day of the year. So there is the ability to just stroll in. And we have to raise almost $80 million, somewhere between $75 and $80 million every year just to stay in business. That is the cost associated with the performing arts part of our mission. The nice part is that we still have an appropriation from the federal government to keep the building in good repair, so in some ways you can say we live rent-free, which is very nice, but it's still a pretty hefty nut in the fundraising department. What I didn't realize when I first came into the performing arts is almost everything loses money. I was just like, this is a crazy business. It's like, you take ballet and the Nutcracker makes money and almost everything else is a net loss. So that was a little bit of the background. Why did we think we needed this? When Deborah Rudder came in as the new president a few years ago, she undertook a strategic planning exercise that was designed to clarify and lay out our direction for a 5-year span. One of the things that this strategic plan laid out was the 3 main elements of our identity and our mission, which you'll probably recognize came from the legislation. The first legislation laid out that we were to present world-class arts in many different genres, and also to provide arts education. And then the second legislation provided for us to be a JFK memorial. If you peek inside this strategic plan, it's actually very specific. We have 7 goals, and this is an example of one of the goals where it's laid out with very specific and clear objectives, and we have a section on every goal which identifies how we're going to measure success. So if you're like me, you look at this and it screams data. We got to have data. Just to give you a sense for some of the objectives that are across those 7 goals, they're pretty wide-ranging, but very specific. So we've got things like increased transparency, consistency, and awareness around the financial performance. Well, we're a responsible organization, so we have financial analysis, we have financial reporting, but that is not really easily accessible to a lot of people if you're outside of the finance department. You'll see actively cultivate diversity and inclusion in the workplace. So we collect self-identified ethnic categorization of employees. We have also the same goal in our audiences. So since we are a national cultural center, we feel that our audiences really need to reflect demographically the country. And so one of the things that we did very early on is to start appending demographic data to our ticket buyer file so that we could have some idea of who the people were beyond just what they had purchased. And getting down to the measures, you can see a similar but even more specific set of requirements here. So it all screams high percentage of decisions made with data. So some of this data we have, and it's being analyzed pretty well, but maybe not distributed very, very wide. Some of it we have the data for, but the analysis is not really strong. And some of it, frankly, we just don't have the data for. So we don't know where to start, or we need to find either proxy data or actual data related to some of these things that we would like to be able to know. The challenge that we face, I'm hoping I'm not the only person in this room who has had this challenge, this is kind of what we were dealing with. We had a data warehouse, but it was pretty ancient. It predated both Jamie and I, and we've both been at the Kennedy Center at least 5 years. When I arrived at the Kennedy Center as a CIO, the organization had just invested in a new SAN hardware, and it didn't have room for the data warehouse. It's a large for us server. Our data warehouse is about 4 terabytes, and there just simply wasn't enough resources on the SAN to accommodate the data warehouse server as well. So it stayed to be a physical machine. For the same reasons, it's an expensive machine to have a second one of, so we have a single instance. The data model itself was really not designed in order to answer the kinds of questions that we're now interested in related to the strategic plan that was formed in 2015. So I think it's fair to say that the original design was very much focused around sales and marketing, and there was a little section that was dedicated to HR and specifically some required compliance reporting. But there wasn't a whole lot that was either helping the development, the fundraising organization, or helping us to know more strategic questions about what the impact of this season was on our entire portfolio mix of genres. So new questions, old data model, not a good fit. The performance of the data load was struggles. It's not built as an incremental data load, so given that we want to have data that's no more than 24 hours old in the data warehouse, we do this full load every night, and it's, as Kitty was saying, it was taking between 26 and 36 hours. And as our data grows, our data doesn't grow very rapidly, but it does grow. As that data grows, we can only expect that to get worse. In addition, the extraction was a whole load of ETL jobs, and one or more of them would periodically fail, and then Jamie would have to spend time in the morning trying to figure out what happened and rerun parts of it. So it was really, it was a time hog, and it struggled. So we said, we've got to tackle this. So what we did is we decided to try to figure out what the future held. I'm a project manager by personality, I think, so I want to know exactly where we're going, where's the top of this mountain, and what's every step along the way. And let's lay out a roadmap to ensure that we get there. Even if we can't afford to do it all at once or in one budget year, we can at least know where we're going, and we can understand that we're on the right path. One of the circular conversations that Jamie and I have had very often is, we have this struggling data warehouse. Do we just add more resources to the SAN so that we can virtualize it? Well, we could do that, but we know that we're going to move to the cloud. I'm not replacing the SAN hardware. I'm moving things to the cloud. So is that a good investment? Do we just get a second server, a physical server, so that we at least have a failover? Well, yeah, but that's money that we really should be putting into redesigning the data model. And Jamie would say, well, if I can just spend some time, I might be able to fix this ETL so that it runs more reliably. But do we want to do that knowing that we're fixing an ETL that we're going to throw away? So we had these often circular conversations, and frankly, we usually found something that was a straighter path to some business value that we could focus on instead. So we ended up tolerating the data warehouse. So we came into this and we were like, maybe we can get some outside help. Maybe we can get a consultant that's smarter than us and can say, this is the order in which you should tackle these things in order to get to where you're trying to go. And by the way, this is where you're trying to go. So we sent out an RFP and we interviewed some possible consultants. We chose one. We had hours of end user interviews to try to get a sense of where the end users thought that the future was in terms of the questions they'd like to be able to answer. And then we sat down at the end of this process, and the vendor started to try to map out data table structure. And at that point, I looked like this. So here I was, like, we've been struggling with this known, suboptimal data warehouse. We spent money that we really didn't want to spend on a consultant, but we thought at least we would have a roadmap at the end of it, and we didn't have a roadmap, and we were just like, well, what are we going to do now? So luckily, we had been having some conversations with AWS on a wide range of different topics, including should we build an Alexa skill to allow people to find out what's going on at the Kennedy Center and buy tickets? Is there an opportunity for us to share any of the Kennedy Center content, of which we have a lot, on Amazon streaming sites? And in the course of those conversations, the subject of this troublesome data warehouse came up, and we had lots of interesting conversations with the technology folks. I think Dom's in the room here. He would always say, oh, we've got a tool for that, we've got a tool for this. And it sounded very, very intriguing, and we ended up having an immersion day that we thought would tell us everything we needed to know about all these wonderful tools. Our experience, I think, was every time that we talked to the AWS team, there were 5 new tools, and we felt like we wanted to get in there, but it was a little bit overwhelming. So what we decided to do was take a slightly different approach. We came to the conclusion that we didn't know enough about the AWS tools and couldn't know enough without spending some time really investing in it and investigating it to know whether they were the right set of tools. And the AWS folks didn't really know enough about our problem sets to be able to reassure us that this is the right tool for you. Oops. So our second attempt was to take a slightly different approach, which was to do a rapid prototype on a database to answer the questions like, are these tools the right tools? Can we get to a working prototype of a new data warehouse that will, number one, solve our existing reliability concerns, and also set us up with a good foundation to take it to the future. So we set out with a concept of an MVP, which was whatever it takes to retire this old data warehouse that runs on the physical server that's causing us headaches. Plus, it has to be reliable and scalable. We need to have the ability to bring in additional data sources. I said in the beginning that some of these questions that we're asking, we do not currently have the data for. So we wanted to allow a modular design so that we could add data. We needed to fix the performance issues. Today, the end users of our data interact with the data very much predominantly through canned reports or through doing Excel analysis on the outside of those output of those canned reports. So we wanted to be able to have a foundation on which we could put more sophisticated tools that people could explore data, not necessarily just consume pre-formatted data. So something like QuickSight or Tableau or other tools that allowed them to really do more of their self-guided exploration and visualization. And then the most important thing is that we did not want an engagement with anybody that left us with a product that we didn't know how to operate or didn't know how to expand. So it was very important to us that this was a training exercise as well as a development exercise, and that the KC staff must be self-sufficient at the end of the project. So having laid that out, I did what I'm going to do now, and I handed over to my colleague Jamie Shova to make it all happen.
Thank you, Nicole. So, having a boss that's a strategic thinker, she often brings ideas like this to me and basically says, so what do you think? Do you think you can implement this? Sounds great. I mean, I have big aspirations for this data warehouse. From 2 weeks into my job at the Kennedy Center, I was dying to rebuild this. I knew it wasn't built in the correct way. There were a lot of improvements that could be made, and I really believed in the vision that the Kennedy Center had and wanted to improve it. The problem is that I already have a full-time job, right? Anybody else? A project like this being thrown on my plate really felt overwhelming. So we needed to have a little bit of a culture shift in order to make something like this happen. My team is only 3 people. We don't have a lot of resources in-house to turn our attention to learning new tools. And so this idea of partnering with Amazon really allowed us a different idea that was kind of making us think this might be possible. So what we did was we got started on a plan. So that MVP structure that Nicole laid out kept us focused on our goal. So it kept us focused on replacing the existing functionality that users were already relying on from a daily basis in that data warehouse. And really important because we didn't want to get into these new tools and you start to work on something that's interesting to you personally and you go down a rabbit hole and you spend too much time maybe not achieving a goal. And it was set out as having a 30 working day scope. So there was a time limit, right? We needed to accomplish a certain number of things within a certain time frame. So there was no time for goofing off and learning new things that just seemed fun and interesting. So what we did was we prioritized all of our work in the IT department at the Kennedy Center, and we have a roadmap for a lot of different projects, and they vary from things that are very operational in nature, like moving our file storage to OneDrive, or adding new functionality to our website for subscription users. And so in order to devote our time to a project like this, we had this huge culture shift where we spent 50% of our day focused on working on the data warehouse. And we did that afternoons. We literally blocked our Outlook calendar. And I really knew that Nicole was serious about this project when I said to her, well, I'm not going to be able to do it on Mondays because we have that every week change review meeting that we need to do. And she said, decline it, or let's move it. And I was like, really? We're going to move our meeting? So it really took a culture shift to keep us focused on achieving a goal that we set out to achieve. We were spending some money on this, and we wanted to make sure it was as successful as possible. So this required really working with all of our other IT counterparts as well. Some of the projects that we already had ongoing needed to be adjusted in terms of time frame in order to allow us to focus on this project. But that support from our senior management to say, hey, if somebody sends you a meeting and it's in the middle of the time when you're supposed to be working on the AWS data warehouse, decline it. And she had she had my back, so that was really critical. And so the process that we undertook to do this was, from a technology perspective, we really walked into this not knowing what the end result was going to look like. We had some ideas about what tools might be interesting and useful to us, but we took a prototyping approach which allowed us to explore different tools along the way and see what value they offered. And from a project perspective, we approached this as, we use a loosely agile methodology for software development at the Kennedy Center, probably very loosely, but we undertook this as a giant sprint. So this 30 working day scope took place over 2 months of time, and we organized our goals in 1 week time period. So we had 1 week sprints, and we did daily check-ins. We used Amazon Chime as a project team. We had a chat room open, and we kept in contact with each other, distributed team from Colorado to Pennsylvania to the DC area, and communicated that way. And so we did our daily stand-ups on Chime, and we all convened at the Kennedy Center 1 day a week on Thursdays, and we used that Thursday time to sit in a war room together and work through some of these explorations that we were doing. Someone was, researching a certain feature and exploring if it was going to work in our situation, with our data, with our connectivity, and we would gather together and work through those things on a Thursday basis, with the idea being that at the end of each of those Thursday on-site days, we would demonstrate or show something, show and tell style, to Nicole. So we were, every week had this goal-based process. And this whole project, having a prototyping approach, allowed us to know that we weren't going to end up after 30 working days with a result that we couldn't support, right? Something, it was delivered to us, but now what? We were beholden to these consultants, and we wouldn't be able to keep this data warehouse up and running on our own. But this was not the case with AWS. Even from the outset, their professional services team said, we won't touch your production environment. We'll help you get started, but we make sure that you're trained with the tools so that you can do it yourself. But as they say, it takes a village. We couldn't do this alone. We didn't know the tools, and so we assembled a team. And it started with the AWS professional services folks. They really got us started with this project and offered us overall project management of our goals and allocation of resources. They also were able to introduce us to the different expertise that we needed, different folks who had experience with these tools and could offer us help in terms of architecture and development. And we were, for our disaster recovery project, already working with a company, Kickstep Technologies, which is an Amazon partner, to set up an environment that would allow us to connect our on-premise network to the cloud. And we were introduced to VSO Inc., which offered us experience with data tools and expertise in the architecture and helped us actually develop the code within the data warehouse. And of course, we had the Kennedy Center staff, 2 to 3 people devoted to this project, providing expertise in terms of the business rules and the use cases of our data, and also we were the students in this project, right? So we were coming away with the knowledge to be able to implement and keep this thing going into the future. So once we had a team assembled, this was the fun part, right? We had to build something that we could get a thumbs up like that guy. Getting started, it was, and I don't know who in the room is already working with Amazon, but to me, I had spent my whole career building data warehouses, but this idea of moving things to the cloud was really kind of foreign to me. We did an immersion day with AWS back in the fall, and so we sort of understood that there was a language about the AWS toolset that we were unfamiliar with, but the first couple of days really allowed us to get used to like logging into the console and understanding the environment overall. And so in order to do that, we got started with some of the Amazon services. So we had a VPC, virtual private cloud, set up so that we could securely create in our sandbox environment. We implemented AWS Direct Connect, which allowed us to connect back to our on-site data, which was on our network, local network, housed in the Kennedy Center. And setting up security groups and access to our environment in the cloud using IAM roles. So, Amazon Redshift clusters. So I remember one of my first experiences hearing about Amazon Redshift was, it was like, oh, you can just spin it up and spin it down. And I was like, this doesn't make any sense to me. So starting to get used to using these Amazon tools, it was really, like, it really is magical. You really can spin up a Redshift cluster, query against it, see it working, and then spin it down, and you're no longer being charged for it. It's really great. So getting used to some of that seemed just completely different from anything else. I mean, you know what this is like. You install SQL Server, you've got to move these large data stores to it, set up the ETL process, and it's a kind of a big architecture to support something like this. And this is completely different, mind-blowing. So once we knew we had a place to house our data in the cloud, we knew we needed to get started on getting our data sources in there. So we have primarily 2 data sources. Tessitura is our CRM system. It's built for the performing arts. It's unique in the sense that it combines ticketing data and contributed revenue data, so for fundraising and ticketing. It's also important to note that Tessitura, the transactional database, is the back end of our website. So we also want to protect that environment from load because we want our users who are buying tickets on the web to have a good experience. It contains, from a data perspective, all of our customer data, all of our event data, including attendance information, and all of our revenue data, both from a ticketing perspective and from a fundraising perspective. We also load into the Tessitura database data that we purchase from an outside company called MMI. What they offer us is demographic data appends, which helps us to do some of that diversity measurement that we talked about during Nicole's portion of the presentation, where we want to understand what our ticket buying audience looks like. And in order to do that, we need to know who they are. We need to know more than what their credit card number is. We need to know where they live and if they have children in their home and things like that, to understand if we're serving families in the best way that we can. And another primary data source that we really needed to include to achieve the goal of having financial transparency was our loss end system, which includes all of our budgeting and expense data, and then would lead us to the ability to measure some of our human resources data from a staffing and diversity perspective as well. So we knew we needed to get that data into that Amazon Redshift cluster, and we had some ideas about how that was going to happen. Experiment number 1 that we approached during this project was we had already set up what we thought was a really good situation. We had a SQL Server availability group that had a copy of our data in Amazon, so it was in AWS. And we were sure that in order to protect the source transactional database from load, that we should be pulling our data warehouse from that copy. However, during one of our research experiments, we realized that that wasn't really a good choice for us. There were some technical reasons why that wasn't possible, and it's a read-only database, so we couldn't do some of the things that we wanted to be able to do in that situation. So we had to think of a new idea. So one of our Thursday meetings, we all sat down together, and sometimes we were just working quietly, and sometimes I believe it was Bennett from VSO that sort of popped his head up, and he was like, well, I have an idea. I think we might be able to use change data capture, which is inherent in Microsoft SQL Server databases. So we tried putting DMS, and that's exactly what we ended up with. We're using AWS data migration services to connect to our on-premise databases, using change data capture to keep our data in sync. So what this offered us was we really wanted this incremental load. we knew this building a 4 terabyte data warehouse every night was inefficient. But we never could have even guessed that what we would achieve here is the copies of our source tables, all those relevant tables, are kept up to date within milliseconds. So the idea of an incremental load is not even it's not even a thought. There is no incremental load. It's just always kept up to date. So that offered us a moment of relief, because no longer did we have this ETL that needed to run for like 6 hours in order to stage these relevant tables and even get to a point where we could transform the data. We really feel like we're in a position where we can build an agile data warehouse. We're starting to believe that this thing might be possible. So now it's time to build a data model. And this, maybe we should have brought our consultants back at this time, but we were ready to model our data, implement some of our business rules. So we were looking for an ETL tool. And all along, during our immersion day discussions with AWS professional services, we thought we were going to go down the path of using Glue. So AWS Glue is an ETL tool that allows you to really masterfully, quickly move big data. But at the Kennedy Center, we don't really have big data. We don't have that variety and velocity and volume of data that you need something like Glue to move. So experiment number 2 was we actually started building an ETL in Glue. And at some point we realized that not only was the learning curve not necessary, because we had really strong SQL Server expertise in-house, but there was another option that would give us something really modular, and that was it was going to be perfect for what we needed at the Kennedy Center, which, like, we're not Amazon, we're not Zappos. The shoes that I looked at, 5 minutes ago are not going to be as important to my purchase as what I bought 5 years ago. At the Kennedy Center, it's more important to know if I bought a ticket to the theater 5 years ago, then it's pretty likely that if I serve up an offer for a deal on a theater ticket, that's going to probably be accepted by the customer. So we went down a different path, and that was we're using AWS data pipeline, leveraging that in-house SQL Server expertise. And it's offered us it's offered us this highly modular situation where we can add different jobs to increase the data richness. We can schedule things at different intervals, so load things at different intervals. Our event data is slow changing, but our order data is very quick changing. So we can schedule those things to run at different intervals. We could load order data during a big on sale every 5 minutes if we wanted to. So it offers us this extremely modular system. And we're executing that by spinning up, again, an elastic compute node. And then when it's completed, it spins it right back down. So we're only using that resources as we need. And along the way, we leveraged a lot of other AWS tools. The entire data warehouse prototype in our sandbox was built using CloudFormation templates. And those CloudFormation templates were built in such a way that when it came time to move this to production, the Kennedy Center team was able to make just minor edits to point to a different VPC, a production VPC, and do that on our own. So we could use those templates to rebuild the whole thing in about a day's time. And all of the code is stored in AWS Code Commit. It's deployed using AWS Code Build. We're leveraging AWS Lambda functions in order to stop the data migration service and execute the data pipeline, and then resume the data migration service to keep our data warehouse copies of tables up to date. And a lot of our code and SQL scripts are stored in AWS Amazon S3 buckets. So at the end of our 30-day working day sprint, this was our result. A little bit more professional architecture diagram provided by our consultants. And so what this offers was a really simple and clean design to the data warehouse that we really couldn't have foreseen when we went into this. And including this beautiful architecture diagram, we also were left with some really good documentation on how to, like I said, recreate that data warehouse, spin up a new Redshift cluster, create a new data migration stack. All of this knowledge was gained by the Kennedy Center staff so that we felt that we had a comfort with these tools after that short time frame. And so as of mid-May, this is actually our production environment. This is no longer our sandbox. We still have a development environment. We've actually migrated from that concept of a sandbox to having a true development environment and a true production environment. And it offers us a really nice architecture that we can build on, really extendable. We can add new endpoints, add new data stores, model that into the data warehouse schema, and build. We can start to really act on some of our dreams of what we want to analyze for the future. So the result of this whole project is we turned the idea of a new data warehouse on its head, right? Turned our frowns upside down. So our new data warehouse is currently in production. We've achieved the idea of the concept of our MVP. We have the foundation that we can pull this data that we are relying on today out of our data warehouse. This data is accessible to our users through QuickSight. We are allowing these users to do some self-service of these tools of this data for the first time. So the most self-serve our previous data warehouse offered was using data connections in Excel to create Excel sheets using pivot tables connecting to our analysis cubes, right? So that was about as self-service as we had. But now our data analysts all over the Kennedy Center, and we have some in education and in marketing and in development. They are on finance, where they're all able to log in there and kind of gain their own insights and build their own dashboards and reports. And then that data will also be available to SageMaker, so we can start diving into, moving forward into the future and using machine learning and trying to get some more predictive analytics out of this data. And then we can start adding more data sources. So we can, I'll talk about a couple that we're going to look forward to adding to in the near future. But we finally have a platform where we're not thinking like, oh, I don't even know how I would model that data into our existing data warehouse. So we can start moving forward with that. And then it's really stable, right? It's a solid foundation. We have that full inherent redundancy of AWS. And so we're no longer faced with, if we have this hard drive or a disk failure. It took us 3 weeks to recover from a disk failure because we needed to find a backup, enormous backups of this server, and rebuild. So we're no longer faced with that, where the whole thing, I think, can be rebuilt within a couple of hours. We could spin up that Redshift cluster, create that data migration service, create all those endpoints. And then the most exciting, like Kitty had said before, the most exciting result of this is that we reduced that daily load time from 26 to 36 hours. I don't know about your day, but mine only has 24. That's now reduced to 6 minutes. And even if we loaded every bit of data from scratch, we're looking at about 2 hours load time. So this is a really solid foundation that we can build on, and we can allow our users to explore and analyze, do reporting, and then do some predictive modeling in the future. So as soon as we moved that thing to production, we set about the task of starting to think about how we can retire that old data warehouse. It's still running, limping along. And then we also are taking all of our existing SSRS reports. So we have a lot of them that are pointing to our transactional databases or pointing to our old data warehouse, and we would like to explore shifting those to point to Redshift. So none of our reporting is pointing at a transactional database. It's all pointing at the same single version of the truth data set. We are evaluating QuickSight by allowing some of our analysts to explore the capabilities of that tool. We're training them on using the visualization capabilities of that, and also training them on how to interact with our data. And this is something really new. We've never really included our end users in how our data is structured and what some of the business rules are around some of the things that we measure. And an example of that is attendance data. So you would think we would know how to measure attendance to a performance at the Kennedy Center, but on one report, one analyst's report, attendance might be the number of tickets sold, and on another analyst's report, it might be the number of people we expect to come. That's ticket sales and comp tickets. And another's report for an analyst might be the people who actually got scanned through the door the night of the show. So it's giving us the ability to create a richer and cleaner data dictionary as well, so that we know what we're measuring, and we're measuring consistently over time and across our different departments. So our short-term future is that we've done a lot of marketing data, a lot of dashboarding around marketing data, but we want to dive into doing something with regard to development data. So development is fundraising data in the nonprofit world, and something I had to learn 5 years ago. And so we have to raise $80 million. That's no small feat. So we would like to develop some dashboards that allow people to assess the risk and understand what kind of pipeline we're looking at in terms of that fundraising. And then creating some additional data sets for various audiences around the Kennedy Center. I'm targeting data that will be useful for different data and reporting needs. And then we are anxious to start exploring machine learning using SageMaker, getting some predictive analytics and some trending and some greater analysis on top of this. And then longer term, we're looking to incorporate lots of additional data. We're already thinking about combining our parking data with our ticketing data and food and beverage data. I mean, imagine if you could perhaps know and plan for the hypothesis that opera goers are more likely to drink wine versus theater goers may be more likely to drink beer. If we could prove that with data, we can make some smarter decisions about ordering and such. And also including some non-ticketed event and attendee data, or maybe even some visitor data, maybe some self-service, self-provided data about who comes to the Kennedy Center as a memorial, so that we can start to understand the diversity of those people that walk through the door at the Kennedy Center as looking to honor JFK. And then bringing in things that are maybe seemingly unrelated, like weather data, but it would be good to know if the chance of thunderstorms at the time when a show is supposed to start might increase the likelihood that we need to delay the start of a show a few minutes. So along the way, we learned a lot of things. We celebrated, of course, but we learned a lot of lessons. And one of the biggest things is that sometimes you just have to jump in. We thought we needed to know the full roadmap before we got started. We thought we wanted to know where we were going. But the future is really murky. We don't know where exactly we're going. We have a good idea, but in order to get the best value out of these AWS tools, we really just needed to dive in. And this experimental approach and this focused set of goals allowed us to do that, staying flexible, focusing on a set of goals, and allowed us to get some really enormous value out of just a short period of time with the AWS tools. So it didn't take us long to start to learn that lingo and get comfortable with the terminology and get some real business value out of it. And then another thing is we started this thinking that we needed to architect a certain way. We bring with us a set of experiences from life, and I know I thought certain things about how we needed to build this new data warehouse, but you can't architect the old way for these new tools. So sometimes you just need to dive in and get to see what these tools have to offer, and then from there, prepare to have your mind blown a little, and then go forward and use that flexibility and the speed of these Amazon tools to your benefit. For the example is that high availability group. We thought we were going to use that node in the cloud. That was exactly how we needed to architect it, but it turns out that we had a completely different plan in the works that worked for us. And then one of the best things we did was we assembled this diverse team. So we brought people with data tools expertise, we had business rule experts, we had architecture experts, and we all came together and made this a really strong project team. And this experimental approach was excellent for learning a new set of tools, especially something so different than what I had experience with. But the set of structured goals that we wanted to achieve kept us focused on the end game as well. So thank you. That is the story of our AWS data warehouse project. It was very exciting. So I hope you can learn something from this, maybe about the way that we approached our process, the way that we tied our goal setting to our strategic plan. I'll bring Nicole back up if you have any questions. I think we have about 5 minutes for questions, if anybody has any questions. But thank you.